because of his perspective on a lot of things going on. Dr. Tommy Curry, as I mentioned, he specialized in critical race theory, anti-colonialism, and Africana philosophy at Texas A&M. Dr. Curry, Brother Tommy, what's going on, man? Good morning to you.
Hey, sir, how you doing? Good morning.
Man, I'm good, man. I'm good, man. I that's one thing about Facebook, man. It makes you believe, boy. I tell you, people watching you when you don't even know that they're watching you. And I tell you, man, a lot of your posts, things, I read a lot of stuff that you put out there. And one thing that I notice a lot with a lot of your posts is that you kind of take on the perspective, you kind of take on and challenge the feminism in our culture today.
Absolutely.
Why is that something that you spend a lot of energy on?
Well, there's a few things. When I first started learning about feminism, I was in undergrad. So, I took the same courses that everyone else took. Actually, when I was at DePaul, I was taking courses to get a minor in women and gender studies. But the more and more I actually start reading about black history and then learning about the classes that I took in women and gender studies, I noticed that there's this huge gap. Where a lot of times where you read black history, you see black historians, both male and female, really documenting painstaking work, going through letters, digging up archives to prove that black people were doing certain things in an area or a period of time. But then when I go to women and gender studies and take classes there, all I get are stories and narratives. And when I ask for proof, because there's this idea that black men were patriarchal, black men excluded women, I was like, okay, well, what's the proof, right? And people become really offended. And they would say, well, the reason you're asking for proof is because you're a black male, because you have black male privilege, because you're patriarchal. And I was like, I'm not questioning. I'm asking, well, show me what happened. And then when I started reading,
there's a such thing as black male privilege.
yeah, this is a big thing in the academy.
Oh wow.
Oh man, but this is why I challenge it, because there's not been one published paper that articulates what black male privilege actually is. So you have some people like LaRue Lewis who would suggest that, well, black men have this privilege, but then they speak of it in this narrative form. And I'm the guy that comes up, I'm the scholar that says, okay, well, prove it to me. When we speak to white privilege, you can see things economically, you can see health outcomes, you can see neighborhood segregation, you can see education levels, you can see marriage and property ownership. But then when you say black male privilege, I say, okay, well, show me the disparities between black men and black women such that it constitutes privilege, and there's always silence. And there's always this emotional response to say, well, the fact that you're asking for proof again means that you're patriarchal, sexist, anti-woman, whatever the term of the day is. So that became my passion for it. And because I do a lot of work on black men and black boys, what I saw was that black male privilege is a way, especially in the academy, for white liberals to justify discrimination against black men. So the way that usually works is that you'll have searches, you'll have job interviews, etc. But then every time you have conversations with white liberal males or white feminist females, what you find is that they use black male privilege as a way to say, well, we don't want black men. And I've actually been in conversations where people were saying that we should not recruit black men, we should not hire black men, our focus should be on black women and other women of color. Now, the problem with something like that is that it creates an academic logic to justify discrimination against black men in the real world. And the problem with this, I never forget, a few years ago, I was invited by Dr. Fred Bonner to do a workshop with young black males at Rutgers University. It was a pretty successful program. It was something that I wanted to publicize on our website, our departmental website, send it to the chair of the department, and the chair of the department said, well, why was it a program focused on black men? So before they would even post something positive about helping young black boys, they wanted to understand why it was a program that was only for black males. So when I send them the data to show that black men are not only the most underrepresented people in the academy, not only the most underrepresented people in terms of students, but also one of the lowest populations in terms of receiving a high school diploma or matriculating from high school, then it was like, oh, well, now I get it. But see, the language of black male privilege masks those structural inequities because you have a certain class of black people that's both male and female, right, that are telling white liberals and white people in the academy that the black community is ultimately oppressive, pathological, and there's a group of black men that are bent on domination, sexual conquest, such that it gives them privilege. But when you look at actual data or empiricism, you can't find that. You can't find that population unless you're talking about the small number of educated black men that, are competing with other upper to middle class black women in the university or law firms or, private industry, for the most part, you're not speaking about young black men and boys as being a powerful or recognized group in America. So that's how I run up against these types of things. I'm trying to make the academy move beyond this dogma in terms of how black men are seen and actually live in this society.
Amazing. Just them putting the words black male privilege together in a sentence to me is absolutely amazing. But it sounds to me that you are taking a fight for many people who like to look at everything as strictly a left-right world, a Republican-Democratic world, a conservative liberal world. You're starting this fight and this conversation within liberals. Talk to us about, absolutely. Talk to us about a little bit, expound on that a little bit more, because when we think about what happened in Seattle with Bernie Sanders a few weeks back, one of the things that the young lady said when she jumped up and took the mic from Bernie Sanders is that basically that there's a lot of racism within liberals. Talk to us a little bit about why you're focusing on liberals in this conversation.
Well, I'm interested in liberals largely because the university, being a scholar, the university is a largely liberal, progressive institution. And what that means is that liberalism gets codified not as an ideology, but as a type of group think. In other words, people say, well, because I'm liberal, I'm smarter and I'm more evolved socially and, consciously above conservatives. The problem with that is that it doesn't take the same kind of critical view of liberal ideology that it does conservative ideology. For example, when you look at the growth of liberalism in America, you see that it's is intimately tied to the same kind of racist theories that conservatism was. So the types of conservatism that we have today is really turn-of-the-century idealism, the idea that we have set values, set religions that move us and make us the greatest country ever. It's like 1900 white man's burden type stuff, right? But when you look at liberalism, it's the same notion that comes out from the same period of time, except it was interested in progressivism, meaning that it was interested in using education, assimilating people into the mainstay of American democracy so that the country stays stable and doesn't fall back into ethnic conflicts or another civil war. So the two ideologies are birthed from the same kind of racial theories. It's just that it takes two views of it. One's a progressive theory, one's an idealist theory. So today when we have conversations about liberalism, you have middle-class blacks and upper-class blacks that are willing to jump on the liberal bandwagon because they have a kind of rhetoric that says we increase diversity, we're interested in plurality, etc. But that's because the plurality and the diversity they're interested in is about bringing people into what their political or ideological fold is. And I think we see a really good example of this with Black Lives Matter, that you're interested in criticizing Bernie Sanders, which I have absolutely no problem with, but you're deflecting attention away from your criticism of people like Hillary Clinton. So if we're going to be movements that criticize liberals, then sure, let's criticize liberals, but criticize all liberals. Don't criticize Bernie Sanders because you said that he focuses on class. And notice how reactionary this is. The argument wasn't that Bernie Sanders somehow has a worse record than Hillary Clinton. It's that Bernie Sanders says something like class, and because we've always had this issue in the black intellectual tradition where we say class doesn't talk about race, let's attack Bernie Sanders for that. Whereas people like Hillary Clinton, who literally told us 8 years ago that America was not ready for a black male president, that America, and really said weeks ago that black men in hoodies are scary, these people somehow, her whole platform has somehow avoided the whole issue of being attacked by Black Lives Matter. And now I've read that Black Lives Matter is supposed to actually become part of the Democratic platform. This is the co-optation, assimilation as force that liberalism has. And this is why I'm starting to fight there, because there's an assumption that if black people hold liberal values and proclaim this idea that we can change white people, that discussion and recognition works, and that, we can integrate within their structures, that this is somehow a more evolved, discussion and discourse than conservatism. The issue is that black people seem to be constantly asking for the recognition of white people. And in the case of feminism, it's become a moral trump card where you can problematize and pathologize radical and lower class black peoples and movements just because you say they don't include women the way you think they should be included. And that's one of the trump cards. So whereas you have working class black people from St. Louis, from Florida, from Baltimore saying we don't trust these kinds of politics. We don't trust these representational politics of Black Lives Matter. We don't believe that black nationalism is the dominant political ideology in our communities. You have people like, Alicia Garza, et cetera, saying, well, no, we have to focus on intersectional, feminist, queer, trans identities as the leadership of the movement. Working class black people are like, we don't understand. You're not those groups are impacted, certainly, but they're not the ones that are being killed at the highest rates. They're not being incarcerated at the highest rates, right? So it's a moral trump card that says, well, because it's a feminist or intersectional type of critique, it gets a pass. You can't criticize it. You have to accept it, and if you don't accept it, we're going to call you Hotep Twitter. If you don't accept it, we're going to call you nationalist. If you don't accept it, we're going to call you sexist or transphobic or transmissile, whatever, again, I missed the hashtags, whatever word they use, right? And what that's done is it's flattened out all kind of criticisms that black people legitimately have of the movement. If you're going to lead a movement for all black people, the question becomes, do you represent the interests of black people? I want to know, if I'm supposed to support a movement, I want to know whether or not your ideology incorporates all my interests.
So basically what I think I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Black Lives Matter movement to you seems more of a movement of feminism and the rights of the homosexual community than it is the totality of black people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it focuses on certain identity politics. That doesn't mean that it necessarily has to exclude all the interests of other black people. That's certainly not its focus. For example, if there was a post that spoke about Janelle Monáe's song where she was saying "Say His Name." And there was a huge blow up on Twitter about how this is patriarchal, right? Because we need to emphasize, say her name, the Sandra Blands of the world, et cetera. And my reaction to something like that is like, now I'm confused, right? If the argument is that black men need to recognize that black women are killed as well, I have no problem with that criticism, right? But if the argument is that black men who are dying by hundreds, like we're talking about like 200 to 300 a year, versus black women who average between 10 to 20, maybe 30 on a given year of police brutality deaths. You're telling people who are the greatest victims of this type of violence that they have to displace themselves for your identity politic. I don't understand that logic. Let me give you an analogy. The analogy would be to say we know that thousands of black men are victims of domestic abuse and intimate partner homicide in this country. We're talking about 30 to 40,000, right? But we know that black women are slightly higher, right? We're about a third, they're about two-thirds of that number. You're suggesting to us that if black men came out and said we no longer need to focus on black female domestic abuse and intimate partner homicide because we're the minority within this victimization, we need to lead all the movements. You're suggesting, based on your paradigm, the world's going to say you're absolutely right. Let's talk about these black men who are being abused and killed by women. That's not going to happen. So it boggles my mind that the way that they use morality and ideology is not based on any principle of leadership, but rather based on an identity politic that many people in the working class black community simply does not gel with. It doesn't parallel their experience. It certainly doesn't parallel the interests of poor black men, women, and children in our communities. So feminism gives them a pass. It gives them a moral pass.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Just and I like to put things, where everybody can quite understand what we're talking about here. If you get into a straight-up battle in this situation, it's going to be a physical battle, which, it is going to be the men versus the men. That's the way it's supposed to be, right, in a physical confrontation. But with that said, it seems to be that in this fight, you have what is projected as, we know there's black cops and there's Hispanic cops and there's women cops. But just as you just mentioned, when we look at the pervasive, the largest number of who police represent, it represents white men. The largest representation of who is attacking and killing these young black men have been white men. So basically, let's just look at it and say that who you're attacking in society, in politics, in policing are white men. Why are we putting our women in the forefront of that battle against white men in politics as well as in policing? And so when you have men who try to step up and try to take those positions, instead of these men having to focus on their enemy in front of them, which in this case is the system, they're having to focus also to the left or the right because the women in the fight are trying to say, no, let us take the lead instead of letting these men take the lead. Does that make any sense? Where I'm going?
No, it makes absolute sense. I would rephrase it a little differently, though. I mean, historically, black women have always fought next to black men, right, and vice versa. Right.
Absolutely.
And I mean, like, not only in terms of politics, but I mean, like, literally with guns. Right. I was just reading Elsa Brown's article, right, and she was saying, look, in the 1800s when black men were having these political missions, and they were having group meetings in churches, black women were guarding the guns, right? So, we've always had that. Our women have always been in danger, and our men have always been there trying to protect the women.